Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at Arthur Pryor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he's a philosopher that had some really interesting things to say about time and logic and how they're all connected and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And our source for this is going to be excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy
Okay,
entry on Arthur Pryor. So
cool.
very excited to jump into this one.
Yeah, me too.
So maybe we could start off with a little bit of background about who Arthur Pryor was.
Sure, yeah.
The entry mentions that he was actually the first New Zealand-born logician.
Yeah, that's a fun fact. Pryor was born in 1914
Okay.
and really was a pioneer in the field of logic.
Mm-hmm.
He challenged the prevailing views of logic at the time, arguing that it should be really rooted in our experience of the real world,
Interesting.
not just confined to abstract symbols and things like that.
So he was trying to bring it down to earth a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. He wanted logic to be something that could help us understand,
Right.
how we think and experience the world, especially when it comes to time.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of just playing around with symbols, he wanted to actually use it as a tool to understand the world.
Yeah, and that's where his big idea of 10th logic comes into play.
Okay.
So he added new operators to the traditional kind of logical toolbox to deal with time specifically.
Like what kind of?
So phrases like "it will be the case that,"
Oh, okay.
or "it has always been the case that." And
Yeah.
these are things we say all the time, but he formalized those into a logical system.
I never thought about it like that, but yeah, we do say that all the time.
Right.
So that's interesting. I mean, it just seem like commonplace phrases, but to think about them as logical operators.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
It's a whole different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, so he's essentially creating a way to analyze how we reason about time, which is pretty groundbreaking, especially back in the 1940s when this was all happening.
Absolutely, and the logic of time was pretty much non-existent back then.
Right, yeah.
So he was really breaking new ground.
And what's fascinating, too, is the entry talks about how Pryor's personal journey actually influenced his work.
Yes.
He started out as a devout Calvinist,
That's right.
which is a belief system that emphasizes predestination.
Right, so the idea that everything is preordained.
Right, okay.
But then he shifted to become a champion of free will.
Interesting.
And this philosophical evolution is really central to understanding his work on tense logic.
I could see how that would be a pretty big shift in thinking.
Yeah.
I'm curious how that, shift from predestination to free will played out in his logic.
So there's this really interesting concept that he came up with called a loosely packed universe.
Loosely packed.
Yeah, so imagine a universe where individuals actually have agency, right? It's not just dominoes falling one after the other.
Mm-hmm.
We can make choices within the causal chain of events. And this idea of loose packing really set the stage for his ideas on future contingencies.
So instead of everything being fixed, there's a little bit more wiggle room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so we have a more open future where choices actually matter.
I like that loosely packed universe.
Yeah, it's a good one.
But so how did he actually represent that in his tense logic?
Right.
Did he use the standard logical tools, or did he need something more to capture that open-endedness?
He needed something more, and he found inspiration in a pretty surprising source, Aristotle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he turned to three-valued logic to represent these future contingencies.
Three-value logic.
Yeah.
Okay, so usually we think of logic in terms of true or false, right?
Right, exactly.
But how does a third value fit into all of this?
So it goes back to Aristotle's ideas about future events
Okay.
that are neither true nor false when uttered.
Okay.
So, for instance, if I say, you will win the lottery tomorrow,
Okay.
is that statement true or false right now?
Well, it's impossible to know right now.
Exactly.
It hasn't happened yet.
It's not determined yet, so it's neither true nor false at this moment. And that's where the third truth value comes in. It represents this kind of undetermined state.
Okay.
And Pryor saw this as crucial for representing an open future where choices can actually make a difference.
So it challenges that binary way of thinking.
Exactly.
It's not just true or false, there's something else.
Yeah, it's more nuanced than that.
Okay, this is where it starts to get a little mind-bendy for me.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how Pryor's tense logic allows us to talk about possibilities and choices in a way that traditional logic just couldn't.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
And this brings us to an ancient Greek argument that Pryor tackled head-on, which is called the master argument, put forth by a guy named Diodorus Cronus.
Okay.
And this argument was a classic attempt to prove determinism.
So the opposite of free will.
Right, exactly. A direct challenge to Pryor's belief in free will.
I'm sure he had something to say about that.
He did not just take this lying down, he used his tense logic as a weapon
Okay.
to analyze the master argument and ultimately pinpoint the fallacy within it.
That sounds pretty intense.
It was a philosophical showdown.
So how did he use tense logic to dismantle this master argument?
So the master argument basically tries to corner you into determinism by saying that only what actually happens is possible. Everything else is impossible.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and Pryor wasn't buying it.
I imagine not.
Because it goes against his whole idea of an open future and free will.
Right.
And he identified like a subtle but crucial flaw in the master argument's reasoning.
Okay, what was it?
It hinges on an assumption about the past.
Okay.
It basically says that if something is not happening now and will not happen in the future, then it must have been the case in the past that it would not happen.
So it's like working backwards and saying, because it's not true now, it never could have been true.
Right, exactly. It's like saying everything was set in stone from the beginning of time.
Okay, so that's a very deterministic view.
It is, and that's where Pryor's tense logic comes to the rescue.
Okay.
He shows that this assumption just doesn't hold up.
Okay.
If we allow for genuine future contingencies.
Okay, those undetermined events.
Exactly.
At that third truth value.
Yes.
Okay.
If the future event is neither true nor false right now, then the master argument's premise crumbles.
Okay.
Because it can't account for that.
It breaks it.
Yeah, it throws a wrench in the whole thing.
So he's basically using tense logic to pry open a little bit of space for free will.
It's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It showcases the power of Pryor's tense logic to analyze these complex philosophical arguments.
Like giving us a new language to talk about these things.
Yeah, exactly. He took logic beyond just abstract symbols and used it to grapple with these profound questions about time choice and the nature of reality.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is.
I think we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
Maybe we should take a little break and let our listeners digest all of this mind-bending information.
Sounds good to me.
All right, we'll be back in a moment to explore more of Arthur Pryor's world.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that whole tense logic battle with the master argument.
It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
It is. It's incredible how Pryor used logic to challenge such a long-standing philosophical idea.
It really shows the power of his work. And, you know, the master argument wasn't the only area where Pryor made significant contributions.
Oh, right.
He also did a lot of work in modal logic.
Modal logic?
Which deals with concepts like possibility and necessity.
Yeah, we touched on that briefly in the first part.
Right.
And I think he collaborated with someone on that.
He did. He worked closely with Carew Meredith.
Okay.
And their collaboration is really quite remarkable because they were exploring modal logic and possible world semantics years before Saw Kripke.
Oh, wow.
Who's often credited with like pioneering that area, published his famous work.
So they were ahead of their time.
They really were.
That's fascinating. So can you unpack what Pryor and Meredith were doing with modal logic and possible worlds?
Sure.
Because I'll admit, these concepts can be a little slippery.
Yeah, they can be. So imagine you have all these different possible worlds, right?
Okay.
Each one representing a different way things could be.
Mm-hmm.
Modal logic allows us to talk about what's necessary.
Okay.
Which means true in all possible worlds.
Okay.
And what's possible true in at least one possible world.
Okay, so in one possible world, I might be a podcast host, and in another, I might be like a world-famous chef or something.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what Pryor and Meredith did was use a binary relation to model how these different possible worlds relate to each other.
So it's like creating a map of all the possibilities.
It is like creating a map of possibilities.
That's really cool.
It shows like which worlds are accessible from which other worlds.
Wow, that sounds like a powerful tool for exploring different ways things could be.
It is, and it laid the groundwork for our current understanding of how different systems of modal logic work and how they connect.
So Pryor wasn't content with just revolutionizing how we think about time.
Nope.
He had to shake up modal logic as well.
He was a busy guy.
It's amazing how he kept pushing the boundaries of logic.
It all comes back to that real-world focus.
Right.
You know, he always brought logic back to our experience of the world.
Yeah. And speaking of real-world applications, didn't Pryor's tensed logic have some kind of surprising impact on computer science?
I did.
I remember seeing something about that in the outline, but it's a little fuzzy on the details.
Yeah, so imagine you're designing a program that handles multiple tasks simultaneous.
Okay.
Like an online banking system processing transactions from thousands of users at the same time.
All right, so a lot going on at once.
Yeah, these are called concurrent programs.
Okay.
And with concurrent programs, it can be really tricky to make sure they always behave correctly.
Yeah, I could imagine with so many things happening at the same time, it'd be easy for things to get messed up.
Exactly, because there are all these different possible pathways that the program can take depending on which processes finish first, what data is received, and so on.
So how do programmers even begin to make sense of all that complexity?
Well, that's where Pryor's tense logic comes in.
Okay.
Particularly his ideas about branching time.
Oh, right.
Remember how we talked about how his logic allowed for an open future with multiple possibilities?
Yes, and how he used that to challenge the master argument.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm sensing a connection here, but I'm not quite seeing it yet.
So think of it this way. In a concurrent program, you have all these different possible pathways that the program can take.
Okay.
Just like in Pryor's branching time model of the future, each pathway represents a different sequence of events, and tense logic gives us a way to map out and analyze these different pathways.
So it's like using Pryor's logic to create a map of all the possible ways a program could unfold.
That's a great way to put it.
That's amazing. But how does that actually help programmers?
So by using tense logic to analyze those pathways, programmers can verify that the program will work correctly no matter which path it takes.
Oh, okay.
So they can make sure that no matter what order the transactions are processed in, no money will be lost.
That's important.
Yeah, no accounts will be corrupted.
Right.
It ensures that everything runs smoothly.
So Pryor's work is literally helping to make sure our online banking systems don't crash and burn.
It is.
That's pretty significant for a philosopher who is grappling with questions of time and free will.
It really is, and it highlights how Pryor's ideas, which might seem purely abstract, actually have these real-world applications that affect our everyday lives.
Yeah, and it speaks to the power of his approach, grounding logic in the realities of human experience and the complexities of time.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see a bigger picture here.
Yeah.
Pryor's focus on time wasn't just about creating a more nuanced logical system.
Right.
It was about developing a tool to understand the dynamics of choice possibility and how we navigate an open future.
You're absolutely right. And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how these ideas continue to shape our understanding of not just logic, but also the human condition.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Arthur Pryor. I'm amazed at how relevant his work is in all sorts of fields, like you were saying with computer science last time.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it?
It really is. It makes you realize how much these ideas that can seem so abstract actually have tangible impacts on how we live and things like that.
Exactly.
So I'm curious now about Pryor's philosophical legacy. Like, we've talked a lot about his groundbreaking work, but how did his ideas actually influence other thinkers in logic and philosophy?
Well, Pryor's influence is huge. He's considered one of the founders of modern temporal logic, and his ideas have had a ripple effect across various fields.
Okay.
It's not so much about a specific school of thought with, like a strict set of rules.
Right.
It's more about opening up new avenues of inquiry.
Okay.
He provided a framework for asking new questions and approaching old problems from a fresh perspective.
So it's less about following Pryor's every word, and more about using his work as a springboard.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's about continuing that conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
And his work has spawned all these research programs in philosophy, logic, linguistics, even computer science.
That's amazing. I mean, before Pryor, we weren't even really thinking about formally analyzing temporal reasoning.
Yeah, he didn't just contribute to existing conversations. He created entirely new ones.
He blew the whole thing wide open.
Yeah.
So you mentioned linguistics there.
Yeah.
How has Pryor's work impacted the study of language?
Well, think about it. Language is inherently temporal, right?
Oh, that's true, yeah.
We use tenses to express how events relate to each other in time.
Yeah.
And Pryor's work gave us a logical framework for understanding how those tenses actually work.
Okay.
And how they contribute to the meaning of sentences.
Interesting.
So his insights have been super valuable in analyzing the structure and the meaning of natural language.
So he's helping us understand how we weave time into our very words.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
It's another example of how this seemingly abstract work has these really concrete implications for how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together now.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
And that, I think, is a key part of Pryor's lasting legacy. He bridged this gap between abstract logic and our lived experience. He showed us that logic isn't just this game of manipulating symbols.
Right.
It's a tool for understanding the dynamics of time, possibility, and choice.
Yeah.
It's about grappling with these fundamental questions of what it means to exist in a world where the future is open.
Right.
And we have the power to shape it.
That's a powerful way to think about it. It really makes you want to go back and revisit everything we've learned.
Yeah.
And think about how it applies to our own lives and our own choices.
Exactly.
And how we navigate that open-ended future.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to honor Pryor's work. To engage with these questions ourselves and to continue the exploration that he began.
Because as he showed us, philosophy is not just about finding the answers.
Right.
It's about asking better questions.
Exactly.
And on that note, we encourage all of you listening to explore, further read the full Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy entry on Arthur Pryor.
Yeah, it's a great read.
It's a fascinating journey through the mind of a philosopher who really changed the way we think about time.
He really did.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Arthur Pryor.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll catch you next time.